realmente é feito, mas no híbrido eu não sei como é que vai ficar por causa do som e toda a gravação, né?
Não,
Mas
mas vou
dá pra...
deixar aqui. A câmera, tu vem para aqui e a gente vai. Eu só vou te apresentar.
Não, fica no YouTube.
Não, não, não. Eu vou para aí, tu fica aqui. Porque aí tu podes usar o PowerPoint. Bom dia a todas e todos. Vamos iniciar mais uma sessão do nosso seminário de Neurofilosofia na PUC-RS. E nós temos a satisfação de contarmos com mais uma apresentação da professora Camila Palhares Barbosa, que vai nos introduzir nessa manhã ao problema da teoria crítica e inteligência artificial. Eu estava vendo aqui que o problema de cada vez que muda de aparelho é que vai... eu vou ter que colocar isso aqui, Camila, senão não vai entrar bem rápido. Deveria ser rápido, mas já não foi, porque não estamos no... E apenas para deixar divulgado, já que estamos fazendo o live stream, só por isso. Então, sem mais demora, a palavra com a professora Camila Barbosa.
Vou ter que entrar nos meus também redes para poder acessar os slides. Deixa eu mais para geral, só mais para lá.
Só para lembrar todo mundo, o único requisito formal desse seminário é que as pessoas que estão fazendo para crédito enviem um paper, um trabalho acadêmico, entre 10 e 20 páginas. O número de páginas é aproximado, é apenas uma sugestão, né? Nós temos que escrever um pouquinho mais, nós pedimos que não seja menos de 10, incluindo a bibliografia, claro. E aí o paper pode ser enviado até o dia 10 de dezembro.
Então, tema relacionado.
Sim, a gente pede que, dentro do possível, seja alguma coisa ligada à neurofilosofia. Agora, quem trabalha em sexo dos anos, por exemplo, pode até fazer por esse tempo. Eu já pensei ontem, mas, enfim, depois eu posso explicar o que foi. É um tema, né? Mas o interessante é que tenha alguma coisa a ver com a filosofia da neurociência.
Normalmente pode ser associando assim com campos de estudo. Então, por exemplo, trabalho com bioética, né? Trabalhar questões de bioética, neurociência, mente, corpo, que daria já para...
Para que dia ingressar? 10 de dezembro. É começo de dezembro. Camila,
Isso funciona.
só uma pergunta. Temos que usar o Zoom para
Para projetar.
aparecer para as outras pessoas ali no...
Vou usar o passador aqui também. Bom dia, pessoal, tudo bem? A gente tem mais duas novas pessoas que não estavam no último, que você não estava, né? Como é que é teu nome? Raquel e Iva. Bom, bem-vindos. So we should change it for English. I think that was the idea of the seminar. So we'll start with our readings that I selected to this seminar. I was thinking about changing a little bit to the continuity of the whole seminar because I was thinking being more specific to AI ethics or the AI discussion overall, but I think we could broaden a little bit because of the interest in different fields that you all work in. So I was thinking doing something on psychology, more philosophy of mind, bioethics to change a little bit. Because the first time I thought about this focus on the seminar was because of our two groups that we have here at PUC-RS, that is IRIS and ICE, that need to talk about last week. And I know that we have several students dealing with AI ethics, but as they are not attending the seminar, I think we could change a little bit. But the idea of this first discussion is try to make a first introduction to AI ethics somehow, to discuss how we are dealing with AI principles, show a little bit of the work we are doing here at PUC-RS and how we are trying to contribute with the discussion somehow, but I thought to bring this discussion through critical theory. So bringing more the political normativity and philosophical discussion to end up in a way in how philosophy can contribute to this kind of discussion and why we are trying to engage in this kind of work recently here at PUC. So I separate this text why AI ethics is critical theory that she tried to argue for a debate, especially about power and how we can discuss power relations to deal with AI ethics. And what is interesting, and I thought about these papers, is that she uses to bring up how AI ethic field have been discussion AI ethical principles, the work of Jobim et al., the whole group of Jobim. And Jobim used it, we have been discussing his work and more three papers that are major analysis review of how companies, institution, academic field have been dealing with AI ethics. So what kind of principle they are bringing up to table and arguing that must be in the guidelines for companies for AI use, right? So she mentions Jobim. Jobim has a paper of that he makes an analysis of 81 documents regarding AI ethics, all right? What we did in IRIS and I was to expand this analysis. We look at 200 documents of AI ethics. So the sample was much more bigger, right? So from this paper, we tried to discuss some contributions. And now with critical theory, I was thinking about how I'm approached to this field because the thing that has been interesting me on this discussion of AI ethics is how we can include a feminist perspective, a queer perspective, and how we can deal with bias discrimination, right? Specifically, we need to talk about democratic uses and how we can bring internet AI systems, tools to be more, have a more participating field because it's very exclusive and we have some problems of biases, not just discriminatory biases, but also technical bias. How the AI tool is trained, who train the AI tools. So that makes a big difference for how they're in their application when the users use it. We have some different. Then after the technical bias, we go to the discriminatory and other bias that we can regard. So the critical theory has some contributions because it's a field that has been constantly discussing the idea of emancipation, the idea of power, democracy and participation, but has also been discussing especially normativities, because AI ethics is about how we get to establish some principles, right, to compose guidelines. So it's not so much of a moral discussion, but an ethical discussion, which means that we try to discuss what should be in the normativical field. It's not about just what's right or wrong, but it's more a horizon of guidelines that we should consider to AI ethics, because each more day we have more and more uses, and are seeing how these tools and this, although is an advancement, also can bring up harm and prejudice. So that's the idea of the paper. The main focus on how the author tries to connect the idea of critical theory with AI is through a discussion of power, and how through the system power can be differently distributed among users, and change the relationship of users with the institution or with the app, and bring some discussion about the democratic field. But I will try to elongate a little bit the discussion through some of the authors that are bring up in this paper that I recommended for today, especially Finberg, that has been making discussion of critical theory and technology for a more long time. It's not his work is not so much specifically for AI systems, but technology in general. But still, we have some interesting views with Finberg that I will try to expand, that is mentioned in the paper, but not in so many details. I will try to bring some of the insights that he gives on his book about reforming technology, and how this is connected to a critical theory standpoint. I don't know if everyone here is knows a little bit of critical theory, has read something about critical theory. How is the overall knowledge, or is like a new field of philosophy somehow? I didn't read anything about it. Not so much. All right. So it's we usually, when we talk about critical theory, we talk about the Frankfurt School of Philosophy, right? So in the beginning of the 20th century, usually I think 1923, right? That the Institute of Frankfurt was created. The idea was, so who was in this institute? The idea is to be a little interdisciplinary. So it's just not philosophy, but social science, social study, history, psychology. They're trying to, in this institute, bring together different fields to try to discuss what they consider, usually use this idea, pathologies, specifically social pathologies, right? So the idea of the critical theory is, throughout these different approaches, different fields, try to identify the social problems. So these have a descriptive analysis, because they came from a Marxist view. So we should look obviously to praxis. So how we can describe the world, but we know that Marx didn't say that we should just describe it, but also change it, right? So we should make an analysis, a diagnosis of this kind of social pathologies. So we have this descriptive view to understand how the world is, and then the idea is to bring up changes that we could to transform the world, right? So, for instance, when Marx in the Capital talk about the capitalist system, he's trying to make a diagnosis showing how it works, and then talking about socialism and communism as a way to transform it, changes for this view, right? So, of course, here in the beginning of the 20th century, we have different versions of Marxism already in play. So it has a historical context for us to understand it. But the whole idea is that, of course, we have a very strong association to what we call the left wings movements that was globally being articulated. And also the idea of this new kind of field that specifically we have Horkheimer's work that should, in this text, he tried to differentiate traditional theory from critical theory. What is the main difference? So in our text is a very broad and a little bit general, and probably a lot of philosophers from the critical theory field will not be completely satisfied with that description of what the field studied, especially because it changes a lot during the time. We have a consensus during the what we call generation of critical theory. We have different approaches, so it's a little bit harder to identify one cornerstone of what critical theory is. But the idea is especially understanding that one problem that we have with the dialectics in Hegel and also in Marx, in this materialist dialectics, is that we have an understanding of history where we are and where we should go from. And after, for instance, after the communist idea of Marx, he called, well, communism is not an ideology anymore, so we can move on. We don't have this kind of problem. So the idea is somehow of an immanence of criticism. The idea of you constantly need to be critical about what you for. And that brings it to another kind of normativity discussion that was moving on through this generation. For instance, in the beginning was a hard normativity. We should change for that, and that is the truth of what should happen. That will be better, that will be progress, that will be a beneficial change. The critical theory generally is yes, but of course, we should be critical, immanently critical about what it is. So if we change the structure, for instance, of our discussion today, the structure of power, doesn't mean that a new structure wouldn't have power. So how this power plays? Who is being beneficial? Who is not being beneficial through this kind of structure? So it's a constant need to be critical. So bring this problematic, right? So this is kind of a general view. We usually talk about them, make a diagnosis about social pathologies, thinking about how theory is connected to praxis, and also being thinking about immanence as transcendence. So what is happening, why is happening, and what should. But when some other transcendent idea came to place, we shouldn't regard as a final big truth, but as a process of dialectics. For instance, we needed to still be in movement about it. The big thing that I think that we could, in very, very general terms, use it to describe the critical theory field is that in Hegel and Marx, we have the end of the dialectics movement. Critical theory, he used the idea of dialectics, but not with a specific theological end, but as a continuous process. This is a big debate, all right? We have different generations in critical theory that have different views of how this play out. Some with more regards to dialectics, some with less. But at least at the beginning of the field, it starts in this way. And we have a discussion like any kind of philosophy that deals with this kind of research is critical theory. We have a debate because some say that critical theory is for philosophers who study in Frankfurt Institute. Some of them making a more broad sense. So just for we understand a little bit more, we usually have three generations in critical theory, and we talk about a fourth. But depend of who is speaking, we add or not this fourth generation. So the first one we will have Horkheimer, Marcuse, Adorno, especially. The second, Habermas. And the third, von Fraser. And in a fourth, we could say Amy Allen, Hayek. So some names of this.
Do you agree that we could say reinforced in the fourth generation?
Yeah, enforced.
That she has.
Yeah. So it's like a different approach and takes to this whole idea, and this changed a little bit of how the field of critical theory deals with the whole. Although they are trying to do the diagnosis, it changed a little bit the focus. Here, in this first, in this beginning, what we have communist Jews in German, right? So we have a little bit of pessimism, this like the negative dialectics that Adorno and Horkheimer think about it, because this negative idea, right? We don't use the dialectic just in a positive way to go to an theological end, but we have this constantly that we never get to this utopian place in the end of the day. And especially here, we have a little bit more discussion about state structures, like totalitarian, authoritarianism, how this impact the masses, right, population, this kind of the discussion. So it was very structural. Here with Habermas, we go to a post-war kind of critical theory, right? So this pessimism changed a little bit its focus. In Habermas, we have a more discursive theory, where he talks about the public sphere and how the public sphere brings up a democratic sphere for emancipation, which is in the end, when we talk about what kind of change the critical theory are looking for, his way of emancipation. And of course, when you think about the word emancipation, you usually associate it with the idea of power, because we are not talking about an abstract liberty, freedom, but emancipation from oppression, from social constraints, right? So this is the diagnosis, how we can be not exploited, not oppressed, have some kind of freedom in these social spheres. So it's not an purely abstract freedom. This is how they connect the praxis to theory. It's not a theory of freedom, but how freedom can be applied in this kind of situation. So here in the first period, we will talk how in this kind of set state, in the states where the authoritarianism, totalitarianism are growing up, how we can think about freedom. They are talking about ways of emancipation, art, right? A way to think about the potential way to emancipation, because free of thought, right? Emancipation of thought is also an emancipation, which brings back the discussion of Marx about alienation. So these problems, and for instance, Horkheimer, but especially Adorno, talks about arts, but also bringing up a dialectics with this kind of mimetics arts, reproduction of the same thing that creates an alienated masses looking for the cultural revolution, right? The automatization of radios, how the Nazi system used this kind of communication to insert to state this idea, so to bring up a big culture, right? So it's this kind of instance that they are discussion. Marcuse discuss about the one-dimensional man, and that is kind of the one thing that one of the authors that I will try to present a little bit more, that is Andrew Finberg. that deals with critical theory and technology uses, because he is specialized, he studied with Marcuse and is specialized in Marcuse thought. And the idea that he brings to the discussion of technology that I would like to come up today is that how Marcuse deal with the idea of one dimension. The one dimension to Marcuse is like the end of the potential to think about change. You know, the idea is that we are so inserted in this idea, in this ideology of capitalism, that we cannot think in other kind of solution. It's impossible to think in a world that this kind of system doesn't work, right? When he talks about technology in his book, he also brings this kind of tension discussion that we doesn't have the potentiality to think on how to transform its usage, but just to adjust in the same set of minds, same ideas that we generally accepted about it. So he'll try to somehow use this idea of making one mind, one kind of understanding of the world, one dimension of what the world is, right? Systematically then, but also connecting to what is brought here from the third generation, that is the discussion of power. And we have here a Foucaultian influence. Foucault was not in the critical theory, but he's very important from the third generation forward. Because of the discussion, for instance, Amiel and Honeff discussed the idea of power through a more Foucaultian way. We have a disagreement. Habermas has a discussion with Foucault, doesn't agree with Foucault very much, but he is more and more introduced to make the discussion of power really means. So the Foucaultian idea of biopower, right, is more and more used to discuss the systemic view. One thing that also changed here in Honeff forward that is interesting to understand is that Honeff and Fraser has this discussion about recognition and redistribution. Right? The idea of Honeff is to try to highlight how nowadays the kind of power that we're trying to mitigate through state and social relations is recognition. And he will focus on social movements, how feminist, LGBTQ+, Black movement are trying to have some sort of recognition as human beings, as equals, as juridical persons, saying rights also. So his call is a discussion about how we can recognize these groups. The idea of redistribution, of course, is about recourses. So it's more a classical discussion about class. So the redistribution discussion bring both this idea. So the Marxists that we call, well, we should redistribute the means of production, right? Or liberals. Not new liberals, but liberals like Rawls that talk about how we should redistribute some sort of minimal to existence, right? So some basic rights that everyone should have so the country could develop. So we should have some sort of affirmative action to deal with redistribution. Fraser says, well, social movements need this both. But what changes a little bit how we understand the dynamic of power, because the idea of recognition and the kind of oppression that we have in this instance is more in the social realm, in the sense that how in the social relations we have some kind of prejudice that makes some people don't belong to certain instance, right? So it's not just a coercive state power, but more of social dynamic and power can move through that. And the distribution, we talk more about, of course, state, the whole structure, so it's more a macro view, the kind of systematic system on political and economic field, right? So Fraser will bring it up. We should have the both. They call a bipolar connection. But the whole thing is that from the third generation, we talk more about social movements.
Which is the year?
Habermas mid 50
Something.
Yeah, I mean Habermas is very, very old. So it's like 100 years of critical thinking. So he until yesterday, Habermas is still thinking and think, but mid-50 we'll start the Habermas rules discussion about democratic views, liberalism, communitarism, and change a little bit the perspective. Especially the big discussion is about public sphere and how people conduct the debates, how it should be a public sphere for a democratic country.
Habermas was Rawls' professor, right?
No, I don't think so. They are very contemporaneous.
Yeah. Habermas,
He's German. Rawls is American.
Yeah. So Habermas' critical theory, Rawls was not in the
No, I
institute.
forgot.
So he's not exactly critical theory, but he is making a dialogue with this. So mid-50, probably 60 too.
yes, yes.
When we see the books being published and the discussion brings up. But to think about a post-war configuration of the discussion of philosophy. Here more about authoritarianism, here democratic sphere.
Solutions.
Yeah, what should be a democratic state? What's the best democratic state? What is participatory action in this kind of state? So how we can redistribute wealth on this kind of instance? What should be the responsibility of a state, of economic system, etc., right? What moves, and this is an important and affirming idea of Horne, is that he called a change in the social grammatic of this discussion. That is not more centered in states and this big macro system, but more about identity politics. So these identity politics that are trying to fight for some sort of better recognition in the social sphere, in this different place. But it's kind of a different take on that. We could obviously we look forward from the different social movements, especially in the United States and Europe, that after the war, like the culture movement, right? The students in France, in America, talking about identity and different. So it's not just a class, just this kind of social organization that we have before, but is more fragmented in different fields, in different areas, because identity is more fragmented, right? So different movements will make up different claims about how recognition should take place. So if you talk about social pathologies, each one of these movements were trying to discuss some kind of unfair system. So patriarchy is one thing, racism is another, right? So it changed. Homophobia, transphobia is another kind of dynamics that we should deal with. So this is the whole idea, and the fourth is like post this discussion. First, tries to make a mitigation of the different ideas of theories of justice. So he tries, because here we have a discussion of how we deal with globalism on one side and cultural difference in the other. So this what this means to moral and ethical field is the discussion that Forrest tries to make, right? And this brings a little bit of the discussion that Finberg and that we saw in this article also. Because so now we are discussing this dynamic of power, and power is not just something that states have, but something that moves through social dynamics, social relations, as a Foucaultian view would argue. But also we need to deal with, since the 90s here, with the globalization, right? And also with more and more claims about cultural and different discussion, right? So discussion about moral relativism, which brings to the kind of discussion that we have in AI ethics, because we discuss principles. In this whole discussion, through the fourth generation and move on, the idea is, well, we should have a global set of principles to deal with AI ethics, or we have different needs on this kind of production and use. So this is the debate, the set of the debate where the whole critical theory comes to. And it's interesting because since the first generation of critical theory, we have the discussion about technology, technical movement, right? It's not AI technology yet. It's not this kind of system that we are discussing nowadays and today. So it's not exactly the same analysis, but the impact of the uses and growth of the technological field and what it means to the social area. What kind of dynamics this kind of technology bring to our social sphere, and is there a new kind of pathologies, right? So it's a question that we should ask. Yes, please.
No, sorry. Could you explain to me again the moral relativism and the principles idea? I think I was,
Well, this is not exactly this discussion of this author, but just to set the kind of discussion
current
that we have.
debates have the idea of moral relativism and the discussion of principles in talking about AI ethics.
Yeah, AI ethics a little bit. Usually AI ethics is about principles. So what kind of principle AI ethics should have to establish guidelines, right?
Mhm.
Because the idea, but this is the point kind of the discussion that I tried to also bring in here, because some sort when we talk about AI technology, internet, we talk about something that happens globally, right? We can access different sphere. Seems like we move on to this Westphalian idea of states, that we have strong frontiers, that we just communicate and have social interactions there, right? Why is it important? Because it is true that the critical theories, since the third generation, are looking for the social movement. Nowadays, we discuss cyber activism. We have a complete shift where social movements take place. We have less public assemblies or physical space, and more cyber activism, where the feminist movement are doing this discussion right now in Twitter while I'm giving this class, right? So it changed. So we need to look there. But the whole point is, well, since at least if we look to the social movement, we have something happened in the 80s, especially this happens very strongly in the feminist movement, but also in other ones, that we have this, before we have this idea that we should just fight, struggle for emancipation, which means looking for the social dynamics in a specific state. Then, after the 80s, the slogan begins in a way that if one woman is not free somewhere, I'm not completely free. It's a more systematic view. So I needed to look to other places. And then we came with the idea in 89, but since the 80s, this kind of discussion has begun, the idea of intersectionality. So, well, we have one same kind of oppression to Black people, to women, to LGBTQ plus community. no matter what state or country we are looking at, or oppression has different takes, which will mean for social movement also different strategies to fight, right? So this how this struggle is made of. So the idea is, well, it's not just one big unanimous oppression, but oppressions.
Yeah, and that comes how with the idea of one-dimensional thinking.
Yeah, because here I think, well, I have this big structure and it oppresses the same way because it makes on one kind of systematic view, right?
Yeah.
But the focus here is on specifically capitalism.
Okay.
Here the discussion is how capitalism or how the economic or political, we can look at different instances, but how it affects and oppresses specifically women and specifically Black people and specifically queer folks,
So
right?
how this-
Because the idea from the 80s move on is different through if we regard identity, because the redistribution between men and women are not the same.
Yeah.
Their work that women and men do is not a thing about class, is a gendered kind of discussion about labor, yes, but gendered, right? That we need to deal with gender to discuss this the domestic field. So the idea, the whole discussion as well, we doesn't need just Marxism, but we need a feminist, anti-racial Marxism, right? So it's a shift on the discussion, and of course, on the liberal side of the argument, they also begin to incorporate that, well, justice means more fair redistribution between men and women. So this is a shift that in the discussion, in the general social movement that is taking place. It makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, is the same, is like one critical thing, but divided in more ways. I don't know if this is right. Because we're still pretty...
Critical thinking is like some sort of methodology, right? That we should not claim for one big truth normative.
But I mean, the new thinking doesn't come against the old ways of one-dimensional?
A little bit, but not entirely. I think the thing is, somehow we can see, for instance, not directly called out, but we can see dialectics between oppression and freedom, right? But what means this dialectical or what this structure that we are talking about changes from this to this one?
Yeah.
Right.
Perhaps it's like she discusses the views on power. They have 4 views, and she says like they're not competing rival theories, but we can try to look at a plural definition of power that englobes all these 4 views in different aspects. So we have the tools of Marxism and etc. to look at economic oppression, etc. But with these same tools, we try to expand our horizon to look at different oppressions.
Yeah, because this is a kind of argument that Honecker was trying to do with the idea of recognition a little bit. That his argument is, well, doesn't matter how much you redistribute, like, doesn't matter how much money Beyonce has. It doesn't mean she will not have prejudice against her.
Yeah.
Because it's not a thing about money, it's not about the monetary situation. Yeah. What?
The amount.
Yeah, the amount of money that you have. It doesn't have enough redistributed action that you can do to make up for racism against Beyonce. Doesn't matter the amount of money, because it's other kind of discussion. It's another kind of power. So to deal with that, it's like different spheres of social dynamics that is happening. So this is why Honecker is doing, well, we need to change our the grammar of social movements, because through that point, we were just discussing state power and the power that social economic dynamics have. So just political and economical. But we need now to talk about recognition and how different people, to use Hayek's verb, has different ways of lives, right? It doesn't mean that we doesn't have a macro structure. That's the point of Fraser. She's still well, and we need until, and Fraser was a student of Marcuse, so she is bringing up this discussion, right? So the idea that we should yet discuss this more structural problem that capitalism have. So we need to until have this kind of utopian idea that we can change, transform the system, right? But it's not exactly the focus on how. The thing is not exactly through a communist or socialist idea that necessarily will bring this
in the way the 19th century thought about.
Yeah, it changed because the 19th century thought that, well, which a lot of, like, for instance, feminists make this critique very, very far long to the Marxist movement, that they assume that by redistributing the ways of production, automatically the gender and the domestic activities will cease. And the feminists were saying, well, no, because the same man that is to struggle with me in the social sphere through distribution and to the ways of production doesn't help me wash the dishes and raise the kids. It's the different kind of discussion that we need to have. So it's more complex how we deal, because this is power too. It's not just in the political and economical sphere that is power, but in the private sphere, the power dynamics and this kind of relations is still at play. Yes.
Yeah, this is a very important feature of this whole discussion here, especially to oppose macro to micro politics, economics, etc. Because since Foucault's contribution was precisely to call into question power is a centralized category, namely that you think in terms of Washington, Moscow, or Brasilia, right? You think of the center of power in a country, in a given situation, especially monarchies or even democracies. Foucault was more interested in the process of subjectivation, or how individuals are surpassed by power. So power is everywhere. So therefore, as Camila is emphasizing here, identity politics and everything that seems to be more dominating many discussions today belong to what we call micro politics. But one important thing to keep in mind is that the fact that you are doing micro political analysis is not to say that there's no such a thing as a macro analysis, right? So when you talk about micro, it doesn't mean that you are completely, canceling macro or central conceptions of power. Because when you think of ideology, if you think today there was a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, or Israel and Gaza, you think of U.S. policies, for instance. Biden sends Blixen to go to Israel to meet with Netanyahu. This is precisely macro politics. You still have macro politics going on. But some people think that Foucaultians are only talking about individuals or gay movements and identity politics. I think that the mistake is to be focusing only on one aspect of this larger picture. I don't know if you understand the kind of
This is a discussion through the social movement that is not just a discussion about class or this kind. It's more with other relations that are still playing, right? So it's the both of them. It doesn't mean that they are giving up of this macro discussion of politics and economics, but it's a different way to approach this dynamics. Because in the end of the day, and that is what she brings up in this paper, she talks about the second general feature, because there is a lot of different theories here, right? It's not the same, but she calls, they are trying to discuss especially emancipation. the idea is we should emancipate. So how we emancipate, that changes a little bit in these generations where the discussion are bring up. And of course, because we have this fourth generation, because even if we look at Fraser, look at her work, we see a little bit of different over the years, where she comes more to how the distribution and how he calls the idea of participation, parity of participation, is important to this global scenario because she's looking at this kind of dynamics of technology, of AI, but especially globalization. Because globalization changed a little bit the sets, right? Because again, where the feminist movement is happening? Well, on Twitter. Well, this ex-Twitter, right? It changed a little bit how it works, because now we are being packed in discussion what's happening in different places, right? But doesn't mean that they're different oppression in the places.
I'm going to invent a verb here. I am open-minding myself because I think this is a kind of academic issue sometimes because we tend to think too much of a black and white kind of way or this or that, and then we cannot what can I say, fuse all, or gather all, yes, all the points of view and make a way out of it. That's what I think. That's my experience. I'm the doctorate, and I can still sometimes get the line of the thing that you know what I mean? You know what I mean? We tend to think too much of the state and individual.
But because it's a huge problem. How do you oppose individuals to society? Or social groups to individuals? Of course, this is a very complex issue. Same thing applies to social movements. Before I forget, Camila, they even start talking about new social movements in the 80s, right? Because it's to recall that we had social movements the beginning of the 20th century as well. For instance, the working class, workers. Well, Marx himself was related to workers in London, right? But for the Russian Revolution, to think of the Cultural Revolution in China, in all different contexts, we had big social movements. In Brazil itself, the whole thing for the military coup in 1964 is that there was a very strong social movement among people in agrarian areas, that were more like workers in sugarcane plantations, etc. And Paulo Freire was an activist in this classic conception of social movements, which were still related to macro politics, as you emphasized. We were not thinking of gender, race, etc. We're only thinking of the socioeconomic divide in Brazil, that the very poor were in, especially in the Northeast, in situations of oppression. That's how the whole talk about liberation emerged in the 60s, and very much influenced by this critical theoretical approach to emancipation. Because Marcuse himself published an essay on liberation. So this was a buzzword for those days, 60s, 70s. And then in the 80s, it's a kind of it's a catchword. We use this word, liberation. Everyone talked about this during the military dictatorship, because it was a way of resisting the military, right? But today you have a much more complex configuration, because you have both these micro political elements, like Camila is trying to arrive there. The idea is to introduce to this new situation, the fourth generation of a critical theory. But of course, it's a long way that we've already run up to here, to get here. But it doesn't mean that, once you get here, it means that you completely, you abandon, make proposals. I'm saying this because some people would think that-
this idea.
yeah, they think, what these guys are talking about, being gay or, being black. This is not what pays me my bills. I have to work for some company or else. And this is in a given structure. We have a constitution which regulates everything, including salaries, work, economic arrangements, etc.
And what these movements are trying to do with this kind of discussion is, well, for one side, we can argue that the kind of oppression or the kind of emancipation we need as women and as Black individuals will be a little bit different because it's the different things. But the whole discussion, for instance, we have a very big impact in this kind of identity discussion of Pateman and Mill's book, the racial contract and the sexual contract. The idea is how race and gender structure our society. That is because how from the micro you also criticize the macro. Is the same argument, I think it's Mignolo that calls a monster head with two legs. The two legs for Mignolo in the colonial. This is my forehead monster. Okay. He calls and gender because he look how in modernity and imperialism movement, right? This kind of distinction between humans structure the other things that state administration. I don't remember all the things. I think bureaucracy have another things here. But the idea is not different discussion, but a different focus to bring up to the same critique somehow. The idea is to be critical of this thing. And I think that's all this because understand a little bit, I think the idea of the critical theory makes a more clear view of what the author is trying to do and why she's arguing that AI is critical theory because it's participating of the discussion. If you think about, this will bring some important discussion, right? When you think about, if you talk about directly influences, since the beginning of critical theory, you'll have Hegel and Marx, two names that are brought up a lot about. Both of them are trying to deal with dialectics, right? What dialectics means is that we bring this kind of analysis to history. It's historical, right? This question, some of the dynamics that this dialectic discussion means is, for instance, how we think about rationality is an a priori thing or something that is developed through history, right? So the material view, since Marx is how praxis creates subjects, creates this kind of individual. So that is not an a priori. We just a claim that then Foucault talks about, there is not a priori structure of power. Is that dynamics is relation, is something that happens to the Marxist strong idea of practice, but in the practical way. And why this is important to AI ethics? Because this brings up this discussion here. We have a priori principles of right and wrong, independently of location, context, and history, or we have a more relative culture. You don't need to be a strong cultural relativism to say that context matters because in different contexts we'll have different history, right? So for instance, the decolonial argument is we need to look to, for instance, America Latina and discuss about the military take. The military presence, this kind of era that has an important impact in our society that doesn't happen in other places, right? So it's a specificity of this context that should be considered. So in this discussion of AI and this principle is how principles can be sensitive to these dynamics in different places. It's important because it's the same ChatGPT, the same tool, but how it used in Portuguese Brazil, how it is used in English, how it is used, and what is the problems that the language, this kind of models bring up. So it's a whole discussion. It's a very superficial point maybe in the article that critical theory has a lot to contribute to AI ethics and the AI discussion. I think she's trying to argue for that. Yes.
Can you please repeat, power is not an a priori idea for Foucault?
Yeah, it happens on the practice, on the relation. So they usually say this in a little bit of a slogan, but all right, that for Foucault, power is everywhere. That it doesn't have an instance that power doesn't exist, right? But it's also nowhere, because he doesn't understand power in a Hobbesian sense, that is something that you have with you always, but it's in relations. I always give for my a student of the first year, when I talk about first time Foucault, this example. I have one power of relation with them because I am a teacher. So I am talking all the time, you raise your hand, so I acknowledge you, then you talk. We have some kind of relation of power here.
I was going to say, we learn.
Yeah, I have an epistemical authority. We are believing what I'm saying because I am a teacher, because I'm doing this in this power completely different at home, where my dog owns me, for instance, right? Or I always give you this example, and at home, my mom said to me, oh, well, not now, now you wash the dishes, please. And I, okay, mom, I will do that now because it's different relation. So it's not something that I have because I am a teacher. It's in certain place scenario, I have some sort of relations. And this is always for Foucault in dispute, right? Because if you assert masculinity, you can maybe constrain my power to stay. I can feel intimidated. I don't know. It's just an example, right? It's something that is always in dispute in this relation. So it's not something that we own in a strong way. And even this happens in sense of states. It's not something that's owned, but it's participatory, right? And the idea of the text to deal with the AI is because we have the same kind of things. Because who creates the system? We are looking to billionaires companies that make a lot of money creating that transparency means is a principle very abroad that means different things, right? Well, I agree with the terms of service. Well, it's explainable, accountable, and transparent because you read what you're doing, right? So this is the kind of the discussion of the principles of AI that we'll do. But it's again, they have this, both things happen between power and the feedback, and we see that in the discussion of power in this paper. That is, for instance, of course, we have some sort of power dynamics with who creates this kind of things, right? Elon Musk buys everything that he wants in the world, has more money than a lot of countries, right? So it's a different structure and a different dimension. But we also talk about cyber activism. We also talk about hacking, right? So we also have users' power to change it, to use it, to participate. So this is the dynamics that the paper will try to discuss. This is why we don't have just one kind of power that she argues, but 4 types of power that are in place. Because that doesn't mean that the AI system give you one sort of programmed response, right? We have a design for the ChatGPT give you the answer that you receive. But doesn't mean that we are not making this process of learning and participating in this community. So this brings back the same kind of discussion of the critical theory, which is what means emancipation in this new set? And why it seems that critical theory has something to offer, right? because first of all, the first commitment that they're making is, well, we should look to social pathologies, not in the past, but in the present description, to look at how the practices are happening and the things that in practice they change, right? So the change, the suggestion of transformations should also change a little bit. It's different dimensions and dynamics that we should look to make for a transformation. Why this is different? Because this is not normally what is discussion, or what is the place of discussion in the AI field, right? First of all, it's a very young field of research, right? Another is, so to make this whole view of how the field, so my first tentative here in the slide that I want to show you, I will try to do what the author did, bringing Jobim, but I will bring our own work to set a big scenario to the kind of problems that we had to make this kind of discussion, right? So here it's just small pieces of the, well, okay. This is all in the text that I gave you, just some collections for us to discuss. But the thing that she brings from the Jobim that was a major findings, because it's a new field, we didn't have the systematics review of what is AI ethics, because it's a whole discussion. What is AI system? They are autonomous. They deserve rights. They have how they play, how we consider them is a whole discussion about how we deal with the system. For instance, we have now this transhumans discussion that wants to give them rights to robots. I think that makes sense to give rights to robots in the same way that humans have rights or responsibilities. That is the point, of course. But in this field, we have, through this new research, thinking about this AI ethics as formed by some sort of Jobim, and was the first one to do this kind of discussion about what kind of principle you have, right? So he evaluates documents that was guidelines to AI ethics, and I came up with this kind of, let me just move this here. So the major principles that guide, right, AI. So transparency, justice and equality, no maleficent, accountability, privacy, beneficent, freedom and autonomy, trust, dignity, sustainability, and solidarity. So kind of principles, right? One thing is that we made in this discussion is, okay, what means justice? We have a big, in philosophy, a big discussion about theory of justice, that it doesn't agree what justice means, right? So what does it mean in each document is also something important for us to discussion, because principle is just, well, we should trust. What trust means? That we should have privacy. To whom? In what circumstances, right? So this kind of discussion that the AI ethical field has been doing. So we have these two kind of documents. We have also Thilo and Hagendorf, which also make in a smaller sample, 21 documents, but arrived at similar principles. So accountability show up in 77%, privacy, justice, transparency. One thing that Hagendorf didn't show that Jobim didn't was the participation of other countries where this kind of principle and guidelines are being produced, right? So this brings us back to a kind of decolonial and critical view about these AI principles and how they take place. The general idea here is that we make this the World AI Ethics Meta-Analysis here at PUC-RS, together with Professor Anita. We did with a lot of students. We make an analysis with a much more large and diverse sample size. We use 200 documents from 37 countries. So there's a lot of author in this paper because it took a lot of work, because usually was like a book, a guideline big that you needed to read to find the principle, the definition, and how they consider. Right? So the first thing that we did was to amplify. First of all, we didn't consider just systems that were directly discussing AI, but also robotics, right? Similar fields was also included. And both Hagendorf and Jobim, they use the exclusion criteria. How? They use the popularity of each document. So they try to investigate the most popular, the more cited, the more used guidelines, right? We try to bring everything that we find, talking about it in some way, right? And also we try to create some kind of typology for the analysis. We try to divide what we are looking when we analyze this kind of document. So one thing that we did, we use the same thing that Hagendorf and Jobim. So we try to investigate which principle and what the principle said. So we have, I will show you, let me see here. I will show the link, hopefully, that we can see like the document, AI ethics to Google, right? And also then you can see transparency and what they call transparency, for what transparency is for them. But also we try to include other things to the analysis, from since the institution, the country of the world, because we are trying to make a worldwide view, right? Where these documents are being produced, and to then see how they influence. Here are publication, the types are, this is academic, non-profit, government, private institution, etc. Ethical principle, the description of this principle. We try to see the gender distribution and the size of the document. Né? To do the gender distribution, we use not the better way, but the only way that we could think about it, that was through name. So we use AI system to put the list of the name, and the AI system said that João is more likely in Brazil to be male or female, and we configure. But the thing is, some of the things that we find through this meta-analysis, right? First of all, in the gender distribution, it's not just a problem of gender, of course, mainly male researchers are doing this kind of research. But also they are very, most of them were what we call unspecified, because we don't have in this guideline signature about from who think about it, right? It's like the Google guidelines. Who did it? Google. All right, but who did it? Google. So it's kind of difficult to set up a point the responsibility. Who thought about it? Was CEOs, was a research team, they use academic field, we don't know, right? We try to also in this typology of how we can deal with this principle, we also distribute about recommendation of AI ethics, self-regulation, so companies giving guidelines for themselves, and then practice, just some guidelines that should be accounted in this institution, for instance. One of the major problems that we have is that most of the documents of that 200 that we found was either government or private documents of self-regulatory views. So Google gives the guidelines for themselves to deal with AI, right? It's not from abroad to the institution. Also government. So we have, now we have the discussion in Brazil, trying to define legally what is AI, how it should work, but we didn't have at the time that we were writing this paper, but also we have, for instance, Canada, that have a lot of papers and guidelines on AI and other kind of system, automatic system, and they use it to self-regulatory. So it is for Canada to deal with Canada. So it's kind of difficult, right? Because it's a very, although the principles overlapped, what didn't overlap? The description, how they consider why, is a guideline that Google gives to Google, saying that they are or will work in this set of guidelines. But we don't have the disclosure if this is really being done, how this works, from who this is idea. So it's a little bit difficult because of that. We don't have big regulatory marks. We have now with like in Europe, the AI Act. That's big because it's the first very more large kind of guideline that should be regulating countries, institutions in the whole Europe Union. But in most of these documents, one of the problem is I give it's like private institutions that obviously have market interest giving ethical guidelines for themselves. And they are disclosing their information also. In transparency, yes, but it's really because the whole thing is how it's a big problem from the principialist view. That is when principles overlap, they don't fit together, right? For instance, transparency and privacy. One seems to be impacting the other, right? If you're a company as Google should be have transparency about how they're doing things, isn't that affecting their privacy? To develop, to have a secret as a company, patent, etc., etc. You have a question?
Yes. So when technology comes from another country, for example, when the Canada receives technology from China or something on the internet, that guidelines is not applied. It's only for the technology invented or, I don't know, coming from Canada.
It's a field that has been changing a lot, right? We have these big markers that are instituting legal responsibility and attaching to the use of AI. But most of them for the documents that you use from governments, it was usually how governments should use. So it's private use of the government, right? So how the health system in Brazil should use AI to apply to SUS.
But not how the AI works.
Not exactly how AI works. Was in 2021 or 22 that we passed the PL that talk about defining what is, because this is a big discussion saying what it is, right? And now that definition is needed to the legal system to apply for it. So to say this is an AI system and this kind of AI system should be regulated through this kind of guidelines, right? But it's a very new discussion that have a lot of problems attached to it. One of them is this usually a guideline that are applying just for this kind of institution. We have changing a little bit now with more legal documents and constraint, but if you look to the major kind of documents that we still have this kind of scenario. So that's one thing that we in this analysis, in this paper, we try to show, right? And also one thing that we used to make a typology was if the kind of principle, the discussion that this document had was too long term or short term. So if we're more a practical view to deal with immediate problems, or if we're more focused on the long run. Most of them was short. So it's not a big discussion about what is justice, but looking specifically how justice is not applying in case of discrimination and how we should avoid it, right? So it's different view a little bit. The long-term discussion will be like how AI system impact environmental, social relations, and this kind of thing. This is how our art in the paper will try to bring the Frankfurt School philosophers, the critical theory, to make the discussion not just about the practice view of these principles, right? That is or the short term, as we call it in our paper, but also how critical theory can think more a long term. Like think about how AI changes power of the power structures and relations, right? So bringing here, so she talks about it in the paper about these different generations. She presents a little bit. We did that already, but she says, well, the critical theory has a practical goal. It means a diagnosis as well as change society. To do so, we need immanent transcendence. These two things, utopian, what should be together with what it is, making this dialectics, making this dynamics, which implies that critical theorists argue how the world should be based on how it currently is. Rather, they always work towards a single predefined image of an ideal state of affairs, right? If we put that to the idea of AI ethics in principle, we start shifting a little bit how we discuss this principle, because the way in which we could deal with this principle is not thinking that we have like a final guideline to AI ethics. Because if the practices, if the field of AI is changing, it means that the kind of guidelines that we have are changing, which forces the idea that we should have a diagnosis of a more long-term relation. Because it's how we can think, and this calls a little bit of political imagination as well. How, in the end of the day, internet, social media, AI systems are impacting social life, are impacting individuals, are forming also individuals, are making individuals be something, have a different mode of being, ways of life. So in the long term, it means that we should be, and that brings to another principle, but has been a big discussion that should be at least the, if we need principle, we should probably order them for the, when they conflict with each other, what has priority. So the human-centered idea is the main concern, right? That AI systems should be tools or should be system, even though autonomous, that facilitate and are aimed to the well-being of human beings, right? So this is the idea that brings legal question. How we can think about AI system in a way that benefit and cause no maleficent, right? Doesn't do harm. If an AI system are increasing, for instance, discrimination and prejudice, then it's causing harm. So we have problems because it's like a theological aim in the end of the day that should be human-centered, right? The idea, of course, what means to be human and what means the well-being of human beings is also a big discussion.
Teleological, right?
Almost a teleological, in the end of the day.
Teleological.
Teleological, yes, as a means to an end. The end of the day, the means of AI should be to cause more beneficial and try to avoid most of it can any harm to human beings, right? So it's kind of whom human-centered means to protect and be beneficial to human beings and human beings' way of living. And that brings, again, this discussion of theory of justice, of critical theory, that what is a good life, right? What is a good way of living, a good society? And of course, this will bring, as the author say, how we can emancipate, how we can deal with this kind of dynamics. And the question, the end of the day, some part of the question is currently the AI system improving emancipation? Right, this is an important question, but part of what we need actually is more studies about it, because it's a system that is a recent field that we need to still deal with. But we have a lot of interesting things to discuss it from that. So it's the same kind of dialectics, right? We are slaves to our social media, or we emancipated in them? Or are we the same person online and offline? Or is a different persona, right? This is an important question. How we have big ethical discussion. By the way, Nancy Fraser talks about a lot about that, because she has a more Marxist upbringing. She talks about more this critical of the capitalism overall. And she has been discussing in some recent papers about, for instance, Uberization, right? It's different work dynamics through this AI system, because some of the difficulties, well, who is the boss of Uber? Right? What is the dynamics of this kind of labor? Because the bosses make it an app, basically. We have probably a board of CEOs, right? That they never heard. They probably don't know who it is, who leads. And from there on, they have emancipation. They have more liberty. They do their own time, their own job. But
how do we regain the connection? Some sort of like this, like the
I don't know if she thinks about how we regain a connection, but the interesting, what kind of diagnosis this means to the social relations of work, because it's different. Because you can go to your boss room and say, I need a raise, right? You are independent. You need it's more about your relationship with the user sometimes that is put in highlight, when it depends on the app, right? But think about the idea of like a food delivery system, Ubers, is that a relationship, a work relation that is basically being doing through this app, this application, right? Consumers directly with who is offering the service. But what Nancy Fraser is interested in how this make a more precarious ways of work, because we have this big hype of how Uber could be a kind of work that will have more means, more payment, right? Will give more money. A lot of people leave their formal jobs to these informal jobs in some point. And now we are in a point of the discussion that we could see that the informal market has making the jobs relations more precarious. This is Fraser's diagnosis. He says, actually, to make a good salary, Uber are working 12 hours a day. And they don't have a kind of law protecting them, because it's a different kind of work relationship. So these changes of work is something that we could say. And now the this change of work passed to AI system. For instance, one big discussion that we have been in AI ethics discussions in recent years is that almost every company now employs through AI recruiting system, right? It's not a person that reads your resume. It's an AI system. And what we have happened is we have this scandal in 2017, I guess, of Amazon, that were not employing non-white employees, right? So the AI system was using a discriminatory way of cleaning and choosing these resumes, right? Also, we have how the AI system deal with all that he analyzed, that is data, right? So the fact that one resume was not chosen becomes some sort of data to this AI system, which means that as more often a resume is not picked up to do a job interview, the more the other AI system will understand that they are not an interesting resume. So it brings that we have this discussion nowadays, that we have a lot of young people that send a lot of resume and is never called for an interview. Some things happen in between the systems that are making this phenomenon happen, right? So it's just example of things that are being mediated through AI systems and tools, and has been point of concern, and that's why we have this discussion of how we can improve AI system and principles. Because of course, no one will say, well, then you shouldn't use it AI system. This is insane, right? We can fight technology and this kind of progress with you if you want. This is the reality, right? Not fighting it, but how we can deal with principles, how we can make a better use of it to improve the social relationships that are being mitigated through this kind of system. And that's what does, in the end of the day, is change a little bit the social reality. That's why that brings us back to this discussion of power in the system, right? That's how this technology is shifting, changing, improving or not, means of power, means of emancipation, means of freedom of speech or not, the consequences of this freedom of speech or not. So that is, in the end of the day, is the discussion. Which means this, which brings back to the author to critical theory, right? Is between emancipation and some sort of slavery that we change what this means or not, or a vision of not freedom, right? So, well, part of the discussion to this this thing, part of the critique that this approximation between AI systems and the AI discussion field with critical theory, and a lot of different authors talk about it, is the idea of what means to these autonomous systems to be rational, right? Because since the first generation in Horkheimer, Marcuse, one of the critiques that they make is the idea of instrumental rationality, this teleological view, that rationality just ends to an end.
Who critiques? Sorry.
What?
Who critiques?
The first generation, we see in Horkheimer, in Adorno, the idea of the critique of instrumental rationality, that we don't think about the reflexive way, right? This is like between reflexive rationality, or a more human critical rationality, or an instrumental, because instrumental rationality for them is the kind of rationality that works very well in this capitalist system, that think about how be more useful, have efficacy, be improved, be advanced, be better. So it's a way that tries to focus on efficiency, but it's a kind of efficiency that works together in the system, right? That, and the reflective criticism is to think about the system itself. This will be kind of, it's very, if you read the text, that kind of discussion is really more in-depth and difficult to apprehend, but the whole idea is a little bit this. The instrumental rationality is a little bit more pragmatism. Well, I live in the system, this is how it works, how I can improve it in that, right? How I can make myself, my rationality, what in this answer will be the more efficient one. The thing that for them we are missing is that the reflective critical thinking, that, but we want to make this system more efficient, right? It's more a micro discussion, and that we look to rationality itself.
That until now, this was my view. Until now.
Yeah, this is like the general view, and they say, well, we need to reflect
Something that kills ourselves, basically. I would say, like
this kind of
there are all these atmospheres, all those things that instead of liberating us is somehow making ourselves worse.
Yeah, yeah.
You have just proved me wrong.
I don't know if we can prove you wrong, but this brings a discussion, right? Because what means to be efficient in this kind of system? Like, we can think about Arendt and the whole discussion about the Nazi solution. Is efficiency to their end is, but it's like a terrible end, right? So this should be more critical about how we deal with that. And of course, part of this instrumental rationality deals a lot of with pragmatism, utilitarianism, that, as Nita said in the last classes, they view that more easily is integrated to this kind of system. Because if you think about artificial intelligence, they have this kind of, is the perfect logic, right? They are not moved by emotions. They obey exactly what the programmer said somehow, right? So it's like the AI system was previously viewed as the perfect instrumental rationality because it's pure logic. The thing is, pure logic is what we want to do with rationality. The problem is, well, it's binary. What we are in this dynamic with the system? Numbers. So we are reducing ourselves to number then. So it's a more broad discussion that brings back to this. If we would say that our teleological idea is to be human-centered, how this kind of logic can work out through that end, right? Is this the best kind of logic? Is this the best kind of knowledge? So I set up the discussion that the field have, and we have different approaches to these questions, right? But this is ethical, normativical questions, right? And also more reflexive in a big way. What means a good way of life for human beings in these kind of scenarios? You'll say something.
I think tradition took us to this point somehow. I myself, I wrote a text about relating Zimel and Arn's thought, because Georg Zimel, the author that I have been working with, one of the authors, he has this text in 1916, the context of the First War, called The Critique of Culture, The Crisis of Culture. And then Arendt takes the same idea, has the same idea in 1961, the Crisis of Culture, but with the subtitle, its social and cultural importance. But then my question in the end of the article was, and what if culture was not the only end to ourselves, let's say? Because the idea of culture is made up within tradition of thinking and like a path. And, it's kind of like hard to deconstruct it, to disconstruct this way of thinking.
Yes. It's not.
And I think it's part of the struggle.
Yeah, I think all of that can be brought up to this kind of discussion, because when we mediate, for instance, culture with this kind of discussion is, well, AI systems are changing and modifying the ways of production of culture, like Adorno thought that the Cultural Revolution did, right? Massification, changing what it means, right? Or are us changing it and using as a tool, right? One of the questions in this instrumental rationality, so first of all, we have this mainstream view that we are logical, we ourselves use instrumental rationality. That is a discussion that are being made in philosophy, for instance. But also, if we use the idea of instrumental rationality and say, well, AI systems are tools, right? Then we go to the discussion that Finberg does in this, how traditionally or in the philosophical debate, we are dealing with technology. If they are value neutral, just a rationality that we applied, or if it isn't, right? Or if it is, he calls substantive, or that the technology in more a Heideggerian way changes the ways that people are. So changes the way of living, how the modes of being itself, right? So it has more substantive change than just a tool with value neutral.
I think I'll have to rethink my project.
Yeah, but the whole thing's this conception of culture itself. That's why I told you, it's a possibility for your own research to go back and revisit the whole thing of culture, because culture is very, very, broad to be taken as a concept. What is culture all about? It's very broad, simply with technology.
Yeah.
The way Camila is now bringing in Finberg in Heidegger, you see that technology is not only smartphones. This is technology. If you took any medicine this morning, even if it was a vitamin, it's biotechnology.
Yeah.
Everything is technology. Period. That's the best way to make sense of it. Because otherwise people think, well, technology, computers, electronic. No, if you think of this room here, what in this room is not related to technology? Everything here. It's amazing.
Even ourselves are
Of course.
a little bit the technology.
Yeah.
You have
But that's the kind of point of,
technology.
yeah, yeah.
Everything's technology. So this is the Heideggerian way of approaching it. Now, of course, other faults like that, and Simondon, etc. Simondon here is the next word, Simondon, Raquel. This is a much broader understanding of it, and it will be the same thing with that students for the evolution of culture, of course. If you go back to to
This is why I'm talking about changing a little bit the perspective of short term to long, because then we can talk about technology in a broader sense.
Right.
That how they did, what means technology. And it is everything, my glasses, my watch, my cell phone, this slides, right? And the more basic things that we have, the chairs, we can talk about a lot of kinds of technology, what are the impact, and it's a different approach. For instance, here in the instrumental is like value neutral. It's things that you use for an end, and what this end is kind of defined by our own thought, because they themselves is neutral, right? In my glasses, they're none value. This is the view. To be making a slogan, this kind of view is very associated with the idea that, well, guns doesn't kill, right? People with guns that kill. The idea of this neutral value is that, so what this means, it focuses a little bit the discussion. We doesn't need to be arguing about is a gun bad or good, or how people use it, when, in what circumstances, bring more for us, right? This could be the discussion, and this kind of discussion can also be brought to AI system. That's what we are trying to do now, right? So when you see algorithmic discrimination, we are seeing what we are doing as user to the system, or we have values in the system themselves. It's different, but a similar question. What changed a little bit? What is the complexity of AI system? Because different than the glasses, AI system have the ability to learn. So it develops itself, has some sort of autonomy that other things doesn't have, right? So for instance, well, the same thing that I was saying about guns, we can say about cars. Cars are technology, they are useful, they take us from place A to place B, right? Depend how we drive a car to think about ends. So when we have a car accident, the responsible are the driver, not the car itself, right? But the thing is, how about now with automatic cars? That there is no driving, it's the car itself, right? It's an AI system that are, of course, designed and program them to evaluate the risks, to teach to the system how they should make the decision. Like you should avoid hitting humans, avoid less to hitting other animals. If you need to choose between a person and a dog, probably should choose a dog, or if it's a rock, choose a rock, this kind of learning teacher that we give the AI system. But what is happening that the AI system, as they are driving, they are learning because they are machine learning, which means like it's the same problem that we have with humans, right? You can teach your son the best, doesn't mean that the result will be exactly what you thought. Kind of, we have not the same way, obviously, because it's different kind of intelligence that we are talking about, but some things happen that is not just the developer input that are being brought to the result, right? So this brings this kind of discussion to what this intelligent means. So this is the difficulty to the discussion of neutral value. But we can say, well, what brings the value to this AI system as automatic cars is how we trained the machine and what kind of input we gave, right? So if we have value that humans' lives are more worth than animal lives and teach the system will reply. So the system itself doesn't have a sort of value input in it, right?
Nothing.
It doesn't act. Think,
So
but think just because of our inputs, right? It doesn't have any value in itself. Because why this is important to an AI ethical discussion? Because we are discussing if the problem from discrimination is social of the users, or if you have something in the development and the system itself. So it's different ways to approach, right? And also, who should be responsible when you see this kind of thing?
What happens when you give cars the power to, well, it's not to think, but you give a memory.
Yeah.
Then we go back to all the discussion of what's the use of memory to human beings, actually, especially as think as thinkers, right? As thinkers, not thinker beings that think.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the other thing, because that's this brings, well, we consider ourselves as have some sort of intelligence with values. We add values to social things, right? Is this technologies and now is AI system neutral in ethics? Is our view and our ideas that should have bringing to it? Well, when you say this human centering, you kind of are, right? Already inputting that, but it's a discussion. But the difficult things to this in this discussion is as things develop, change, that the AI system, again, the difficulty is the input that the designer gave is not exactly the result that happens. That we have problems because it's big data. It's a lot of data. And what happens in the end is different. And one thing that we're dealing, for instance, when the discussion about discriminatory algorithm begins in this field was usually, well, how we can avoid that the user who has bias, prejudice, influence the learning of the machine. The idea was the prejudice is in society, they are just reflected in the AI system, right? That was the first idea. Recent papers has been discussing in a more substantive maybe way, because they're saying, well, it's not actually just representing the bias in society, but are increasing. That is one big discussion to algorithmic discrimination. For instance, 1 year ago, they made a research using generative AI. So they're trying to generate, asking for an AI system to generate images. And they asked, could you please do an image of prisoners, of inmates, right? In the American context. If you use the social paradigm, well, the AI system also should make an image of prisoners, right? They will pack the data that come from user culture. So, well, if what is in USA, you'll see what look like a prisoner in USA and generate an image of what this kind of prisoner is. We could, I think, already think that we have people of color, right? Or non-white, because Latinos, etc., will enter in the picture. We could imagine that, anticipate that the AI system will reproduce the same ideas that we have in this context. Am I making myself clear? The problem is, in this study, they showed that the IE system actually increased the inequality. So it was 22, I don't remember exactly, but it's 20 something that was white inmates, and the IE system brought it up to 7. So they didn't represent the discrimination or the set, they aggravate. They make the image be more of non-white.
According to an article, which article?
I can check and send for email the name of the article, but it's of generative image AI and the representation. I don't remember exactly.
Eu agradeço.
I can send you guys the image. Yeah, and they show it how they show the images that were created and make an analysis about it. But I can send you. I have on my computer. I can send you later. But that becomes a discussion also about what it is representing in the sense, right? That brings us a little bit to the substantive theory. The Finberg idea here is trying to discuss, well, this is kind of a very positive way of dealing. It's just a tool. A tool has no value, so we shouldn't question the tool. Here's a little bit more a dramatic way of dealing with technology also, right? So in the substantive theory, and Finberg talks more about Heidegger and the question of technique and technology overall, and that's characterized with a specific dynamics that ultimately overtakes every pre-technological enclave and shapes the whole social life. So it's not some tool that are being used in the social context, but it's substantively transforming the social context, right? And making things out of it, right? So he talks about this Heidegger, and he said, well, asserts that the technical reconstruction of modern society is rooted in a nihilistic will to power, a degradation of man and being to the level of mere objects. So this brings a little bit of a discussion that can be held together with critical theory of alienation, of reification or objectivation, right? When we say, well, what we are to the AI data is data or numbers. We are making ourselves one object, right? A non-mathematical entity, not a human entity itself. So these ideas that are dramatically substantively changing, not just the social context, but the beings that participate in the social context, right? In Finberg's view, we have here a little bit of a catastrophic and apocalyptical idea of technology too, right? That, well, we should leave social media and follow everyone in Instagram and go back to the real thing, right? So this is also something that Finberg was like, it's a little bit pessimistic, it's not happen. It's have almost this, for Finberg at least, right? This almost a Rousseauian view that we lost ourselves in the progress, right? Our good savage.
Many words good, but
yeah, exactly. So men are born good, everything was fine until technology came. Well,
Instagram.
Now we are someone with something like with properties, right? So it's a kind of a more pessimistic view. So we have here, and this is kind of the scenario that Finberg puts, that we have two different ways of the discussion of technology have been held, at least in philosophy field. It was good, progress, tools to improvement, neutral value, and substantive, terrible values. Changing who we really are is not, in the end, is not just human-centered, but they are changing what human beings means, right? So we could have this criticism of post-human or transhumans discussion that were brought since the technology, right? So that brings to this theory. And what Finberg, and also I bring Finberg because he's based for this paper that we are reading. He's mentioned And most of the discussion that she made are from this text. So I thought it would be a good idea to enter a little bit on the kind of diagnosis that he are doing. And if you, there is a lot of interview, if you're interested, in podcast and YouTube of Pinberg, and because he are recently doing this discussion. And it's interesting because he is trying to mitigate a little bit, not being so optimistic all the way along and say that's neutral value, but also not have this pessimistic or defend that we should give up technology overall, that should fight against these uses, right? That mitigation is what you call a critical view. So this is what a critical view of rationality and a critical view of technology should mean to him, and that the author of our paper adds to her own view. So to do that, he, before presenting the idea in this book of critical thinking, critical technology, and the idea of how can we transform, be critical in a way, how we can use this tool in a transformative way, right? She will talk about the moral and the political boundaries of how the discussion of technology was being held, right? So just to give you a very quick view, is that most proposals to reform of technology seek only to place a boundary around it, not to transform it, right? So the thing is that she used the idea of one-dimensional view of Marcuse, that was the main author that he himself studied, and he has books about Marcuse, etc. That he says that, well, we usually think of technology as one big truth, one big thing that works only in one way. Here he's being critical of the both of them here, right? There's both view, because each of you is that how efficient works, is how it's neutral, it is like that, they are efficient, they bring back progress, they make us evolution, they help with the evolution, they bring better life, this is how it is, right? So it's very deterministic in this way. So we should set values that bring, that promote, for instance, AI, right? This is a more optimistic view. If you have the substantive, more pessimistic view, we'll say, well, we need boundaries to control it. We should have more and more restriction of AI ethics, for instance, right? So it's two ways. In the instrumental is creating AI ethics to improvement. The other is held up AI ethics, make it strong, very normativity, strong claims to constrain this technology that are destroying our ways of life, right? So in both of them, they say, well, we have this moral boundaries being set, but in either case, they are making a strong claim about what this technology is, saying is good, is bad, and in this logic, we should constrain. His thing from the critical thinking is, we are not thinking how we can describe its praxis and to change it, or instance, how we can transform our ways of life, being, and using technology, or thinking about rationality from this technical improvement in new technical apps, right? So we'll say, well, in this moral boundary, one problem that we have is that it's trivially difficult to reach agreement on which activities should be protected from technical mediation, right? Like childbirth, the family, politics, ethical and religious tradition. The only consensus values left in modern society is efficiency, precisely because the value we are attempting to bound so that the other values may flourish. Of course, he's making the same diagnosis that the critical theory earlier did, that the way that our structure is implemented is, as Marcuse said, in one dimension, that we should increase efficiency, right? And even with, if you think in the substantive way, we are still thinking about how we constrain this kind of efficiency. But the question he is doing is, well, none of them think about how we can transform this way through it. So we think about how enslaved, but now how we can bring up emancipation, but in more a critical way that doesn't just talk about efficiency and this kind of instrumental thinking, right? So Rico, if we can deal with in the moral discussion about this kind of logical and how to deal with technology, he brings back to the political boundaries, right? He says, well, here we have a more interesting discussion to AI system and to technology. It's not a moral one per se, because we go to different approaches that we can solve, but in the politicals, right? So he says, the conquest of society by technology is not due to the occult power of the technical phenomenon. Rather, technology as a domain of perfect instruments for achieving well-being is a simply more powerful and persuasive alternative than any ideological commitment, right? So say it's doing more than the whole discussion that we are doing about in philosophy and the critical theory about ideology, because it's spread these boundaries, right? It's not, for instance, we think that the AI systems now we have this globalized phenomena. Is not an ideology of one specific continent, country, point of view, but it mitigates different work, right? And also is more make more part of our life than the ideological commitment that we have, right? To use it really more. So we are very, so we have this, for instance, this idea of socialists with iPhones. But yeah, of course, this is the case, that we live in the society and our commitment to this kind of technology and how we use the system will be more specific. But the whole idea of Finberg talking about the potentiality of the discussion through the political boundaries is precisely that through the political boundary, to the political discussion that we could call more unethical than moral discussion also in the ends of ethnicity, will mean, it's failing here, will mean that we can argue through the political discussion what means emancipation, not value and attributing a bad or good outcome towards technology, but thinking what is an obligation on how democratic states should deal with this technology, right? So how democratic states should regulate the use, or in what instance should improve the use of AI systems. So the kind of discussion that Finberg is interested in, for instance, education, how we can use AI system to improve one source of education, not just this efficient education, right, but to transform the way that we educate ourselves. Not just saying, well, we should all do courses by distance now, just online courses. It's not the point here, but how we can improve and change the ways you think about education and this and even the democratic commitment in the sector where this kind of tools are being used. Because something that one thing that Finberg analysis, not so much specifically in this book, because he's making a claim about technology in a big sense, but he have another book specifically about the internet when he makes a more specific claim about it. For instance, how internet changed social movements, how the internet could bring some sort of cyber activism that bring up change in the world also, that is being used to transform in some kind of sense. For instance, how we can create a more transnational social movement through the use of social media, social networks, right? So if we are saying that doesn't mean that doesn't have another kind of powers being conducted in this structure, but that is not just slavery through, and just emancipation, but it's a struggle still, right? That's how we do it and how through this we can change it. Another thing, I really like this kind of discussion that make a claim on transformation, because always remind me of this discussion that we have about political imagination, because I think at the end of the day, is a little bit what is in the end of this discussion, right? That we can imagine different uses, different ways of living with this kind of technology, of with ourselves, or creating different kinds of fields, right? So the idea here is we can use it to transform it, but to it we need to be critical about how this whole system works, right? Make this major criticism and claim to deal with this kind of technology. And that brings him to this idea, right, of a critical theory of technology. This theory charts a difficult course between resignation and utopia, right? What we are saying about this end, this teleological, but they try to mitigate how strong this utopian state is more like a normative or horizon that we should look at, something that we should aim for, right? Not saying this is the utopia we should go, but more like towards that end, in that means theological, right? In still this descriptive, transformative, right? So utopia will be in the transformative, could be different, we could change it. It analyzes the new forms of oppression associated with modern society and argues that they are subject to new challenges. But having renounced the illusion of state-sponsored civilizational change, critical theory must engage far more directly with the question of technology that is customary in the humanities. It must cross the cultural barriers that separates the heritage of the radical intelligentsia from the contemporary world of technical expertise and explain how modern technology can be redesigned to adapt to the needs of a freer society. So for Finberg, this is a political argument. It's not just a human-centered view, but it's more like how we can improve a free society. So it's committed to political, participatory means, with democratic means, with free expression. So bring up this political discussion to the field instead of the moral discussion itself, right? So this is what he calls a critical thinking, a critical theory of technology. He in this book talk about how social science are already developing a social sciences of technology that could be used by the critical theories as well. Yes.
I heard of someone that washing machines are not a problem. Washing both machines are not a problem because then, well, women have more time, so they're very good.
Yeah, this is maybe an optimistic view of the thing.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, women don't have to work anymore.
Yeah, I think
Like literally.
we have this kind of discussion, but the problem with this just optimistic view that is improving is that we should still be critical, right? That it doesn't work alone. It doesn't get your dirty underwear from the floor and and wash it. You need a lot of work around it too, right? So we still have a long way to go, but it is. It's like how this social movement can think through these technologies to bring up change, right? But this doesn't mean that it's value neutral, right? Because when we think about this claim being made in society, well, washing machines help women, we're talking about one kind of mindset of thinking, right? That are using, instrumentalizing of this kind of thing. So maybe it's question also the idea that is value neutral, because people are saying that the idea of value neutral is not the best, because it's affecting, because if we add value to these technological tools, therefore they have value because we did it, right? Depends on how we create this value, and we shouldn't.
Like in a very Marxian idea of
Yeah.
Merchandise.
Of merchandise.
Yeah. Because the whole discussion about rationality and the instrumental rationality are brought back, right? So it works in the set of idea of what instrumental rationality is. The problem is, well, we are adding value to AI system because we have been in philosophy a long time thinking that logical thinking is the best way of thinking. As more mathematical and strictly logical it is, it's better it is to decision making, to bring to have a best solution to specific problems, right? But this is a way of seeing the world. Doesn't mean that it's the only one, maybe. And this is the kind of at least question that I think the critical theory of technology is trying to articulate towards that. One difficult that I think, specifically in this book of Pinberg, and a little bit of how he's using this idea of technology is because specifically he doesn't enter in the AI system itself, because I think it brings another type of argument, another type of discussion also to the table. Because he talk about cars, bridges. Okay, the bridges and AI system, we have a long way of technology apart. So how we deal with that right now, right? And of course, when we talk about AI system, we need to talk about Silicon Valley, how Silicon Valley is making up the discussion about the USA election right now in this point, influences, money, what is happening in these big companies, how the military are using technology to purpose of war or security or protection. Well, security is a principle, so countries should use technology to secure their territory. Well, this will mean something, right, to what has been built. So the idea, well, is exactly that how we think about the world connects with how we not just use it, but how we produce this whole idea and technology, right? So at least in this, when we go to the discussion that the author does about power, is with this idea of critical theory of technology in mind, right? So it's different from the instrumental and from the substantive. So this why this connection important, because I think it's a way to explain and why she talks about these 4 types of power or different relations of power, because it's not just value 0 power, it doesn't have just our using of it. AI system could be powerful itself alone if it has power, has value to it, right? But also we are interacting in relation with them, which means that these powers are in relation in a Foucaultian way, maybe, right? And one thing is also is how power are producing other kinds of subjectivity, self. That is a discussion overall about technology, right? That how we can connect some sort of technology with some ways specific of being. Well, for instance, we have this biopower by Foucault, biopolitics and idea of biopower, right? Paul Preciado uses to talk about biotechnical power, because he talks about the technological way of how he calls a post-Ford setting, Fordian, or from Ford, setting of massive production of subjectivity. That he can go, that was what we do in this period when we talk about identity. We produced we produced massive ways of being. For instance, being a woman is a strong subject from masses. It's produced in masses, right? Male, woman. And so one thing that makes being woman is, for instance, the reproductive discussion in rights. And the reproduction discussion of rights depend on a little medicine called the pill, right? Anticoncepcional, birth control pills, and other ways. This is technology, right? And the technology to produce human as a conception of human who as, for instance, sexual beings. Depends of these little things that happen in the 50s, right? It's a little example to show a little bit what Foucault was thinking with the idea of power. That is not something that are related, circulating between us, but make ourselves. establish the ways of we understand ourselves itself. Like it's something that make ourselves subject. And I think we can think how we use this technology now to make our online persona or change the instance how we transmit or have or think about I don't know, knowledge or interest, what we do for time, right? So it is not changing just structural things, but ourselves also. So this is why we need to talk about this whole dimension of power, because it's a power of like interpreting ourselves as selves, calling ourselves as I am da-da-da, I am da-da-da. This is a kind of power relation too, right? Where you can be able to do this kind of things. We again doesn't matter in this what she brings in this text, doesn't matter when she divides this four views in the power, that when we say that the power are to ourselves to interpret ourselves, that then we have full emancipation because we define who we are in this structure, right? So in some sense, I have some sort of emancipation to call myself a white woman here, but that doesn't mean that doesn't have a structure power, a binary thinking that are conditioning how I speak, how I present myself, and the most important thing is how I understand myself. So the idea is to connect, and not to, it's more categories, different kinds, not, we should choose one and another, because the micro, the self, and the micro structure should be understanding these power relations in a connected manners, right? So to finish up, I talk way too much already today, but the idea then is to, what she brings differently than Finberg is the discussion about power. Well, we see in the last generations of critical theory, a more stronger discussion about power, and she tried to use that to a way to discuss this AI system and making a technology build. So we call the dispositional power, right? That is the only is power two, like an ability, capability, that argues that power is a capability or ability to bring about significant outcome. So it's like a capability, right? The ability to do something. This is what power is. And all the other views, the episodic, systemic, constructive view, is power over in the sense that is more relational, right? Foucault. What? Like Foucault. Like Foucault. Because this whole interpretation of Foucault is also a mud battle in the philosophy a little bit. Finberg says in his book that you should be less Foucaultian, but he has a more like he understands a little bit. Seemed to me that he understands that Foucault are saying that we are constrained to power and we have nothing to do. We can deal with it, right? Because say, well, power is in everything. We don't have absence of power. So Finberg understands this as a negative thing. Like we can't then emancipate from power because power is everywhere. But I think the thing that there is is a little bit more subtle, this idea of how Foucault understands this power, because that doesn't mean that we don't have emancipation for Foucault, right? He has this theory, for instance, is that we will never have absence of power, but he says in what is critique, that the idea of critical reflexive thinking is that we can say, through the discussion and this analysis of the structure, we can say, I don't want to be governed by that, or not the rules, not the way, not in this manner. Doesn't mean that I will not be governed at all, but it's an emancipatory claim, say, not like this. But you see, like
there's always an implicit way of being somehow or something.
Yeah, it's like we'll not have an absence of power, but doesn't mean that we shouldn't and couldn't change the power dynamics. But the thing is, the question is, we always permanently have to have this problematic or this critique of how corporate power is in relation to others. Like if I gain certain powers, is that constraining on others? when I speak, I'm silencing. You know, this is something that you should be questioned because we haven't because again, it's relational, right? How it works. Because about episodics, there's very simple, as instance, A having power over B to the extent that A can get B to do something that B wouldn't not do otherwise. But it's a very specific concept. It's episodic, right? I can say now, please open the door. Probably a student go open the door. I caused this, right? This systematic view is also more relativistic, but refers to the way in which societal institutions, social norms, values, laws, and groups' identities can have power over individuals, right? It's so more structured, systematic instances that constrain individual power. Here we'll talk more about A to B, right? More individualistic. You know, also here, because capability to do. Single individuals with the constructive way then is to refer to the view or discussion of power that focus on the oppressive character of power, but on the ways in which those subjected to power are also shaped by it. So this will be a more Foucaultian view, right? That power is something that we relate to create something, or we participate on creating this systematic power, right? We participate. Every time we came to this institution, we fertilize the idea of this institution. When I say, no, I need to do a PhD and I need to do seriously, I need to go and call professors. I'm reinforcing the idea of the institution itself, right? Something that I do. So I shape it, but I shape it myself. I am a specific kind of student in this particular kind of institution, right? It's both ways. Of course, the academic institution is just an example, but it's part of this dynamics. So it's both ways. So that's why you construct. At the same time that we are influenced by the power, we also produce, reproduce, and in this dynamic can change this power relations. So the idea is that we could, in the AI system, use this more systematic way to think about it, because it doesn't put the idea of power in one thing. It's not in the system, it's not in the company, it's not the systemic view, it's in those complex relations. One thing that's interesting, I think, to like for critical theory to bring up the discussion is, well, we still can have, for instance, the principle of autonomy. But how we can transform it? We have been doing this in bioethics, that autonomy doesn't mean an individual with autonomy and decision-making for itself as atomic individual, the classical view. But for instance, in bioethics, more and more we talk about relational autonomy. That autonomy, decision-making of one individual depends on its context. Depend of, for instance, in bioethics, the medical team, the family, the social relations. So it's not a singular autonomy, but an autonomy that took place in relations to one another, right? So same thing could be said to autonomy in AI ethics, not an individual autonomy, but a relational autonomy, because if I have autonomy, who hasn't right now, right? How these power relations are being thought. I'll always send this slide post for you in the Moodle, for you have all the things, but generally it's just little parts of this book, so you can have this access on this text that being presented. Just to finish here, I put up some challenges that maybe we can think about, like the colonial challenge, how we from the South can produce and participate in the discussion, where globally the discussion of AI principles in the North, right? So how this impacts us. I bring here this text, Algorithm Colonization of Africa, that Abani Gilham talk about how we have a new kind of imperialism and colonialism in place through this AI system. She makes a whole argument that is very interesting. We have this discussion that we brought in our paper of self-regulatory self-recommendation. If we need to be more relational, maybe this idea of private should be questioned a little bit, right? dealing with this technical and ethical bias that we're talking about, or improving the system to have a better outcome. And we have more the broad long-term discussion to do in that, like what this means in the substantive question, or how technology creates new ways of life. There is a new idea of social selfhood, new relationships that we should analyze in a critical thinking. We have this discussion of love commodification, of how the idea of love is through social networks interaction, like Tinder is the main way to find someone, and how we deal with that, or how friendship, and because we are dealing with now a new generation that has different views that in my time we have, right? My youngest cousin have friends through gaming online, so he passes the way heavy social interaction, but it's true, like the system, right? It's not face to face. So how this changes their relationships. And love is not just a family loving relationships, but the general term of how we relate to each other, more in the social media than in the present itself, right? So changes the spaces of interaction, which brings to the social isolation that we have when we have the spread of this kind of technology. The idea, the whole discussion of education and what means knowledge in the palm of the hand that now we have. Like we can Google everything and have this discussion, but more and more we have this statistic that new kids, young infants that are in the school right now, they use TikTok to learn because it's fast, it's funny. So it's all, they don't want to like change it for reading Wikipedia that we thought, now I can access the Wikipedia, have access to everything, and now they don't use Wikipedia, they use ChatGPT and other AI system, but also a lot of TikTok. So they put hashtag Foucault and watch videos about Foucault because it's a new way of, so what means to have knowledge now is shifting in a long-term discussion.
This gives a text, the TikTok's way of the education.
Yeah, and this brings that the education should be humorous, fast. You know, no one will watch this full class, thankfully, on TikTok, right? But the thing is, the impatient will think how we have different instance of time. What was a video on YouTube later, like this is a class transmitted to YouTube, but what kids or who are searching for this knowledge look for. Well, they have this idea that should have between 10 max to 20 minutes to have any kind of explanation, right? So if not, the person will lose interest because it's more fast now. So this is questions that we should be concerned in the long term to answer. So I'm not bringing any answer, just some fields that we should conduct this discussion. And also, for instance, what this happened to the social movement after cyber activism. Improved, not what happens, what kind of dynamics, and how we can fight the struggle for emancipation in this kind of context. Like, so it's just discussion moving forward, right? I think the general idea was that is trying to bring to the philosophical field to make more connection with more discipline and this kind of argument. And you can see that we need to discuss the whole idea of rationality, how we think, logic, how we understand the world to bring up this discussion. Anyone interested more in this kind of discussion, we have our groups here that are trying to do something with that, especially thinking the colonial view, right? How the South can contribute to this kind of discussion, especially considering that the context is a little bit different, and also anticipating what this means, like for a country that exports basic commodities to deal with this very technological world, right? How much soy grams we will sell to buy one computer to a school? I think it's the macro questions also. I guess that's it, guys. I will put these slides, but this was something more like the general views of the discussion, what was happening, but it's a way to deal with technology through philosophy and critical theory.
If you have any question, complaints on Twitter, etc., please.
I have a general comment. First of all, to thank you for this beautiful and very exhaustive presentation of this topic, because it's a very good way of introducing what we want to do in during this semester on AI ethics and how it relates to neuroscience, philosophy of neuroscience, neurophilosophy, bioethics, applied ethics overall, and as in this presentation, critical theory. And it was very interesting that you picked this article, because I'm going to do the next presentation. In my view, was precisely to go into question whether you could assert that AI ethics is critical theory. I myself, I do not agree with this, but this is for next meeting. But one interesting thing about Foucault is that it's precisely the way he, just like Feinberg presents these two different views of instrumental and substantive conceptions of technology. Foucault is very interesting that he's not following Heidegger, but somehow he's inspired by Heidegger's reading of technology to go even further than Heidegger. Because for Foucault, everything is really technique. Even in one of the slides, you put religion as something, well, of course, this is not technology. Foucault precisely,
It is a technology.
everything is technology.
Yeah.
And precisely, if you take this Heideggerian view of technique, and in Foucault, it's not only for science, for technology, as we think of technical devices and sophisticated electronic devices, but it's also for art, right? And that's how Foucault comes up with this idea of aesthetics of existence, because it's in the very field of art that technique is also a way of bringing in new worlds and new ways of relating to other selves, right? It's a relational conception, as Camila put it, and therefore technique, both as art and as science, and as philosophy, religion, is everything that culture is all about. So there is no culture without technology in this sense that Foucault tries to rehabilitate. And it's very interesting to think in these terms. And of course, Heidegger is very dangerous, I would say, his way of demonizing technology. Feinberg put it so well, also in Marcuse, because it seems that you don't take into account instrumental value of technology, which is more or less what capitalism, the way people think of technology, something you can also throw out if you get sick of it. You don't have to be neutral. You don't think it's inherent to your human condition that you have to be a resort into technique and technology. But of course, depending on the way we are conceiving of technology and technological relations, in Foucault, I think it's more like Simondon. So it's very much in a very philosophical understanding and relation, very much like Simondon, which is also even mentioned by Feinberg as a good way of moving away from this dichotomy or this, let's say, false dilemma. You are either demonizing or you are too optimistic about technology.
Yeah, that was, I thought, interesting about the attempt that Feinberg is trying to do. Agree or not with the critical approach, I think at least we'll move on from, are you just criticize it, need to get rid of it, or we had this excited and just optimistic view, right? I think we are something in the middle of this both. We have bad, good, not just use it, but we can transform the relations through it, right? Think more pragmatically how we can use it. I think we think about social movements. I think this is an interesting question.
the impact of that to this kind of movement? What changes? What we have a better outcome? Maybe we do because we have more knowledge of how oppression takes places in different contexts, right? Because we read it on people talking about it. We have more ways to deliver the news. So it's different than dynamics that I think is important to social movements. So it's a way of emancipation also, but I think the question is still like how we do it, right? And the discussion about education and technology and how we understand knowledge, I think is very interesting to move forward. Because it's the both ways. For instance, when you have this climate change here in Rio Grande do Sul, when we could do the classes online, right? We are asserting and doing something positive, but how we can make more democratic. That's the thing. For instance, my friends that's professor at URGS, they couldn't finish the last semester yet, because they have a lot of students from marginalized communities that it's not that they don't have access to a computer, but it's one computer in a room with 4 or 5 kids that we don't have a proper place to study, right? So this have an impact of how they watch, learn, and pay attention to the semester. So just the fact that we are here in a private institution from a public one, we have different outcomes from the use of online resources. So I think that the discussion that we should be having also. But I mean, we shouldn't try to demonstrate why we shouldn't demonize. Also, I bring this amazing test that I spend my time doing ChatGPT. For instance, escreva poema sobre ser gaúcho como se fosse Heidegger, já que ele odeia a tecnologia, vamos incluí-lo. Ser gaúcho, então, ser no mundo, na vastidão, onde se entrega a pampa e o homem e a terra se funde a um só. Fala de autenticidade. São as coisas divertidas, assim, para subverter, a gente vai tornar inautêntico Heidegger aqui, usando ele na tecnologia, pedindo para um sistema de inteligência artificial ser heideggeriano. É muito divertido. É bom também porto alegrense, assim, alguns bar ser autêntico, é divertido de brincar. Assim. Mas, enfim. Tinha esses slides, depois eu coloco ali pra gente também, para...
Muito bom.
Very...
You have a question?
No.
No. Okay, fico.
I just want to say that I am looking forward to the exposition, because I precisely noted down here AI ethics is critical theory, in my vision, like watching, because it is participating of all the discussion brought about by critical theory historically. Because it seems to me that like our exposition made a whole picture of the history of how we resist in somehow society, but not society,
Yeah.
Today's terms, oppressions, perhaps. And then to think how in another point of view, how can we break or put ourselves in a new instance, and how can we criticize theoretically? Because one of my critics, like to theory in general in academy personally, is that we stay too in the theoretical sphere. We don't go to the practical. It is something that got my attention, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's a dilemma that the critical theory has trying to deal with, but the gap between theory and practice is a long discussion, right? And we still bring up. But the thing is, if we don't have the part of the theory also, you have just description of the world.
Yeah.
Well, if you say that's enough, I just need to describe you as how things are, okay. But then we kill ethics, because ethics is should, right? like we just described how it is. So I think that the problem is the theory is trying to emancipate also to think another ways of dealing with how it is. So the both are true also because we need one to another, right? We can, for instance, create some utopian idea completely apart from what the world already is, because we can describe how we can change it, right? But without the parts of the theory, also we have pure description. Say this is how it is. Okay.
And critical theory has normative elements.
Yeah, yeah.
But in my view, it's not enough to equate critical theory with AI ethics. For one simple reason. Applied ethics provides bioethics, business ethics, etc. Whatever kind of applied ethics you want to think of. Do you say that all of them are critical theory? Because if you say that AI ethics is critical theory, so is bioethics, so is business ethics. And I don't think it is. I think the problem with this definition is, it's of course, it has to do with definitions, how you define critical theory,
Yeah.
how you define ethics, how you define applied ethics, how you define AI ethics, etc. But overall, it's a problem with making applied ethics to coincide with political theory, which to my mind is not desirable, and it's a mistake precisely from the perspective of critical theory. That's what I'm trying to say. In critical theory, it's not enough just to think of ethics being applied to a situation, therefore this is critical theory. No, you cannot go that far. This is a bad move, let's say, because being critical about, for instance, something that's completely abstract and detached from reality, as you were talking about, academia in general, this is not sufficient to say that, because descriptive ethics is not ethics. If you say, well, these people behave in such and such, well, this is an anthropological or sociological description.
Yeah.
It's not ethics.
Yeah, that's why I said you kind of kill ethics because you need a should, not an is for
the whole
discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, and the whole thing for critical theory vis-a-vis applied ethics is precisely that you cannot think that one given model of ethics, let's say utilitarianism, which is the one that's most used for AI ethics, let's say. But even if you think about virtue ethics, deontological ethics, you name it, all different models of normative ethics, this is not enough to make this into a political theory unless you are presupposing that the political and the legal, wherever you take to be a law, is based on ethical normativity. So this is a problem with normativity overall.
Yeah.
If you say that, in a Kantian style that, or if you're presupposing a Kantian conception of normativity, to say that you have a moral foundation for politics and law, okay, but this is a supposition, or it could be even a dogma. You say, well, I'm saying that this is the way it is. Okay, we don't talk about it.
No, we have
But if you put this into question, like Habermas did, John Rawls did, several people did on different occasions, you say, no, I'm not so sure. In my case, especially for the Brazilian situation, if you analyze anyone reading Lilia Schwartz or one of those historians of Brazilian political history, you're going to see that the 5 constitutions we had in Brazil, these were all top down, and they were elaborated from people who were, first of all, trying to give the Portuguese, some constitution for their colony in Brazil once it became emancipated, theoretically, quote unquote, to say that Brazil was independent from Portugal. Still, we still have a very colonial mentality because What you have in Brazil is still oligarchical structures. And you don't have a full democracy for this very reason, that people are not taking part. You're not participating. This is a very good word, participation. If you don't have participation in democratic institutions, this democracy is quite flawed, which is the case of Brazilian democracy. It's very flawed because you have election, it's mandatory, you have to go and vote for someone. This is ridiculous. This is not democracy. You should have more investment in education so that people could speak in the first person. I don't want to go there and vote. I'm not going to vote for Lula or Bolsonaro. I have my own view of what's best for Brazil. But that's not the way most people think today. So therefore, human beings are so conditioned that, of course, it's much easier to manipulate the masses and to say that you're going to go in one direction or another. And therefore, it was interesting to see that Finberg was bringing this of the state conducting civilizational process to say that, well, this is the way we usually think of, of society. And it's too bad, but it's true. That's what we learned from our own historical experience. Most countries, they go this way. Most people do not take part in this discussion because most people are not, they cannot afford to come to a place like Hook and have a discussion, in this very important.
And Finberg makes this analysis. He says, well, actually, when we talk about this use of technology, we are not talking about the state, high standard, democratic thing. We are more talking about social relations. He says it's the same as encounter in the streets where people interact, create, produce, and discuss things, because it's a more practical utility also, this tool, right, that we have in our pocket. But I think part of how in this text or article she's trying to do it is a very narrow view of what critical theory is. Because again, I don't think we have a solid definition in this generation. Critical theory must be, this is how it is applied, because she says two things. One, look to praxis, and that should be what we call, must be applied. It's not just ethics, but applied ethics. This brings to the practice, right? I think that's the reach that she is trying to do. And also look to emancipation. So we took criteria to be critical. Try to think about ways of emancipation. And she will say, well, we talk in the AI principles about autonomy, privacy, security, justice. Therefore, are vocabularies of discussion about emancipation. Therefore, we could bring this to. In the paper, then she makes a very small resume. She talks about, well, what means transparency? And she tries to talk in a democratic participatory means to say that is a similar discussion. But I agree. I mean, it's a very narrow view to what critical theory is, right? Because
it's like applied ethics. It's like most of these principles are very much used in bioethics. The four principles are exactly the same: autonomy, maleficence, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. These were already the four principles for bioethics for most, hospitals and people working in the health science.
This was my question when reading the article on the thing principle, because principle is it directs you, right? But so it generates a conflict.
Yeah, but this has also been criticized among bioethicists. In other words, it's very practical. If you go to São Lucas Hospital, all doctors use these principles because it's easier. But this is different from philosophers who say, well, I think this is very much, that's,
It's a discussion about is efficient. Yes, it's efficient. This is the kind of efficiency that in the end of the game you are trying to look. I think there's a way maybe that the philosophy.
Everything's under attack. So there is not.
I'm going to make a question of philosophy. Well, what's the expression you used? aesthetics of from Foucault, by Foucault.
Existence. Aesthetics of existence.
See, a
Is that-
philosophical question
Yeah.
as well. I kind of like put a thing in the thing.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's just that, yeah, in philosophy, there is no simple concept that you'll be satisfied and say, well, here it solves all the problems. No, you can always raise questions. And that's why Foucault is very interesting that he managed to bring in some very interesting conceptions. But I'm afraid that maybe some Foucaultians don't help much because they really believe this is like a religion and you're gonna save the world or something.
Yeah,
That
maybe
Foucault
not the
himself
best
will never agree with it.
Foucaultians.
Or Nietzsche, you know, and other folks.
But it's interesting how, for instance, Foucault entered the critical theory debate. For instance, Amy Adam, right? She has a text that's called Emancipation Without Utopia.
Right.
How we can think about emancipation or liberty without a strong end of the game concept. And she tried to conciliate Ben Habit's idea also that is almost a dialectics here between a utopia with emancipation means to emancipation and what Foucault was doing, that is analysis. Analysis descriptive. The thing is how to have emancipation without utopia is that when you go to utopian state, well, we want to have a democratic state. All right, we have a democratic state. We have really, right? That is go back to the descriptive phase. She understands this as almost as a method. So is a view that when we go to the ways of utopia, this utopian becomes the analysis. What should be criticized about. So it's a way to think about it. What?
Reflective equilibrium.
Yes, that's another way of talking about it.
Ideal theory of justice as opposed to no ideal theory of justice.
Yeah, I mean, because Alan was one of the authors of the Frankfurt School that tried to elevate the Foucaultian view and idea to understand. His analysis of structure is very important for critical thinking. For them, we can think about transformation, but this normativity should be what the problem is still power. Then we are oppressed in other way by the norms. We have oppressive norms now, right? The thing is, well, we change the norms, we change the law. How this new law could be oppression because there is still relations of power in it, and then is a question that we should ask again, right? So in her discussion with Hayek, Hayek used the idea of a thin normativity. Like we should have normativity, but should be like a strong concept. Should be a thing that we are questioning what means, right? So it's not as firmly affirmed as in other should, like in a Kantian way or the imperative way. It should be like that all the time. So it's soft. To soften up a little bit the idea, but it doesn't mean that's what in the text Ellen was trying to argue, that Foucault not abandoned normativity, that some of the reading of Foucault is just destructing normativity. He is making this analysis of how we are governed throughout these laws, this rule, this kind of thinking, and to bring questions about it. But again, the idea here is to bring, because I know Nita talks about critical theory and AI, and to try to introduce a little bit about the discussion and move on from the mainstream discussion that is more too pragmatic and think in different ways to approach it, to make a more a case to how philosophical approach could enter in this field, right? Nicholas, who was just finished his PhD with Nita here at Cook, he talks about this new tendency, I believe, of what he called a normative alignment, an alignment between the AI ethics system with human values. And we go back to the problem of what human values we are talking about. Is it global, contextual, how we align this kind of goals to be human-centered. But the idea that we should use it to, is a philosophical approach to align the tools, the system, to certain spheres of values. But it's a big discussion, it's a very recent one. So one of the problems is I try to bring three main, but the papers that exist about a meta-analysis of ethics. So it's a very fresh new discussion also. We have a lot to deal with it. And also we have, I, for instance, I don't have expertise of a developer of AI systems. So I still find myself looking at this black box constantly, right? Because the one to another is very technical. It's difficult for who doesn't work with software engineering, right?
Let's leave it to other technicians.
Yeah, but this is the idea that we need an interdisciplinary approach to deal with it. Otherwise, we'll have limited views, right? So I think that's the idea of bringing to how AI system with philosophy, with engineering science can help the medical team of the Brain Institute to think about this, right? So I think it's a more interdisciplinary field of investigation research. It could be good, right? Also bring more of them to here, more of us to there, right? To exchange a little bit more between this subject.
This is not say that it's not helpful to apply that. I'm just saying that it's a different preoccupation.
Yeah.
In terms of a concern. The concern for a philosophical concern is precise in terms of grounding principles. Where do principles come from? Because if someone says, "Oh, they come from the Bible," say, "Oh, forget it." So you're not a philosopher, right? If you have a religious account of principles or the Ten Commandments, what God gave to Moses or Jesus, others, then forget it. This is not philosophy. It's doing theology or religion.
I remember reading anything by AI on the Bible, right, or something like that.
Exactly. So I'm saying that just to make clear that the problem with philosophy is that everything is going to be called into question. There is no way you're going to be saying, "Okay, this is good enough." No, you always asking questions. You are raising questions.
Yeah.
That's really we are paid to do that. Right?
Exactly.
So
That's the job.
that's the job. Not free.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you guys. Thank you for today.
Excellent.
Thank you, Camila. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, guys, for the questions and the discussion. Can I